It's true.
So as we do, just being present in this moment, present to how our bodies feel, present to the texture of our thoughts, our emotions, what's on our hearts. Also present to the field, the atmosphere in the room. Because this form of practice isn't about just ourselves, but it's also ourselves in relationship. Centering in the heart. And imagine that there's an auxiliary set of nostrils in the heart that you can breathe light and life force. So in through the heart, in drawing light and life force, exhaling anything that's not light and life force. You can exhale it through your heart. You can let it settle out of you down through the floor of your pelvis into the earth. You can release it that way. You can treat it like a shadow that simply dissipates when the sun comes out. Or alternatively, you can recall to mind some memory of physical light. Maybe it was the sun coming up after a series of cloudy days. Maybe it was the afternoon sun coming through tree leaves or reflecting off of fir needles, cedar fronds. Any experience of physical light that was at some time uplifting or magical, or that just stopped you for a moment and you went, wow, that's really nice. So recall that experience, bringing it into this present moment with your creative imagination, distancing yourself to it here and now, as though you're reliving it. And regarding that light as a kind of subtle substance that, again, you can breathe in and out of your body. And if you wish, you can think the word nur on the inhale and on the exhale. And if you find yourself becoming drowsy, which is not unexpected as we begin to relax the different layers of our ego, open your eyes just a little bit. So you're letting the light in the room and a little bit of the world around you filter in through your eyelashes, but still basically focused inside. You can actually do this practice of breathing light at any time in the middle of any mundane activity. So breathing nur and breathing light for a few breaths. And now let's say the invocation given by Hazrat Inayat Khan. Toward the One, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the Master, the Spirit of Guidance. And so notice what, if anything, might have shifted before and after the invocation. And so taking the felt awareness of what's transpiring in you, through you right now, really feel into it. Feel it as poignantly as you would want to feel your last breath. And pin that. Make a little kinesthetic proprioceptive snapshot of what you feel right now in this breath. And we'll say the invocation again. Toward the One, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the Master, the Spirit of Guidance. And now, being mindful, notice what, if anything, might have shifted between the previous time and now. And don't make up a story about it. Just notice the actual sensation. And one more time, just for grins. Toward the one, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the Master, the Spirit of Guidance. La ilaha, la ilaha, illallah, la ilaha, la ilaha, illallah, la ilaha, illallah. Inna la ilaha illa la ilaha illa illa la ilaha illa 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 la ilaha illa 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 la ilaha illa la ilaha illa la ilaha illa la ilaha illa la illa la illa illa la illa illa la illa 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 eyes open la illa la illa illa illallah, la ilaha, la ilaha, la ilaha, illallah, la ilaha, la ilaha, la ilaha, illallah, la ilaha, la ilaha, la illallah, la ilaha, la ilaha, la ilaha, illallah, la ilaha, la ilaha, la ilaha, illallah, la ilaha, la ilaha, la ilaha illallah, la ilaha, la ilaha, la ilaha illallah, la ilaha, la ilaha, la ilaha illallah, illallah. Illallah, 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 illallah. Illallah, 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 No spacing out. Breathing the echoes of that practice in and out of the heart. Don't try to steer it. Don't make up stories about it. Just be present and be mindful. And if you wish, you can put the word hu or nur into the swing of your inhale and exhale. Words of Hazrat Inayat Khan. There is a question. If meditation is required to develop in the silence, why is zikr sometimes chanted? And why are some practices said aloud? The answer is that there are certain purposes in each practice, and that the ordinary distinction between sound and silence does not hold true from the divine point of view. For instance, in zikr, one may become able to arrange the atoms in order and rhythm and harmony. When students chant in groups, they often magnify the power of the atoms. Often this brings the same effect as the presence of the teacher, but generally zikr awakens the soul so as to produce alertness or even ecstasy. In zikr, the thought is kept on all the syllables and sounds, making it difficult to think of anything else. If the zikr becomes automatic and is recited without proper thought and feeling, it is still of value because of the intrinsic power of the atoms responding to sound. Besides that, it harmonizes one with the atmosphere and attunes one with all zikr atmosphere, so one cannot continue the practice without developing out of it the necessary thought and feeling, which will then carry one along. When this is accomplished, one becomes attuned to the spiritual soul's higher end evolution and becomes awakened to impressions, and may even arise to that state when the separateness between the mind and the heart disappears in the realization of zikr. So zikr may be called the finest thought expressed in the finest material form with the highest spiritual purpose. It becomes the perfection of the sounds uttered by the tongue. Zikr is best understood through its performance. In singing and chanting, one purifies one's being and even one's mind. Then one develops into a zakir, who is the embodiment of zikr and the vehicle of the message of God. The zakir is the student perfected in zikr. The moral of zikr is humility, and in its performance, the nafs, the ego, is absorbed like the shadow when the light is turned upon it. Zikr is important for those needing power and inspiration, while meditation is for those desiring calm and peace. Each are necessary for those who seek God in all forms, and each is only of value when practiced. Then each fulfills its purpose better than any explanation can give it. Fikr is a practice which is a tradition of most Sufis by which they keep before themselves the nothingness of ego and the allness of God to learn and feel until they know that God is the only being. One may say that the disciple in Fikr can be called Fakir, the poor one, the unattached person. For the fulfillment of Fikr is that there is nothing in the world, in heaven nor upon earth, which can cling in the personality which is determined to complete its journey back to God. Therefore, Fikr aids much in the purification of mind. It forces the thoughts away. It may be called the vacuum cleaner of the mind. It helps to preserve mental magnetism and to restore it when lost. It is valuable in strengthening any mental activity and in restoring those which are lost. So, in a certain sense, Fikr accomplishes the same result as meditation. Meditation consists of preparation, performance, and application, which means action. Then, when one holds the spirit of unity at all times, the whole of life becomes a meditation. In this, meditation differs from Fikr, which has to be performed in a certain way and which cannot very well be done in the presence of others or where there is any possibility of a disturbance. The performance of meditation can reach the goal, however, when one can maintain full inner rapport without there being any impediment to outward activity. Meditation aids greatly in the development of insight, which can become the deepest faculty of the mind. There is no limit to the length of time one may indulge in either. Akbar, the great Sufi and Mughal emperor of India, was able to get along with practically no sleep, often meditating for hours at night instead. Meditation may be performed at any time, although is a certain advantage if the same hour can be used every day. The length of it does not matter so much as it often requires several minutes to accomplish that stillness, which is the real meditation. Some persons cannot do it in less than 30 minutes. Therefore, a gradual lengthening of the period of meditation to that time is advantageous. But after one is able to control thought, it does not matter so much. One can obtain the stillness, ultimately, even with a single breath. Nevertheless, from time to time, a meditation of 2 hours is valuable, or in its place, a silence of over a longer period in which there is full restraint of speech and as much as possible of thought and action. So I need to say something about this word fikr. It's Fikr, or in Arabic. It's not actually etymologically related to fakir, but Sufis love wordplay. There isn't a good translation for it in conventional language, but it refers to the practice of silently repeating a particular power word or a particular zikr, a particular phrase, typically on the out breath or the in breath or both, or having pieces of the phrase split up over the in breath and the out breath. And I've taught a particular zikr melody to be repeated internally if you can manage to make it adamant and let it begin to run as a prayer wheel on the rhythm of the breath. The advantage of it is that it's something that can be done in the midst of everyday activities. You can put a particular sacred word or a mantra into the breath and just keep breathing it in and out. And it begins to take up a certain residence in the mind and the heart, and eventually pushing aside the dross, and with it, much of the neurosis that human beings tend to carry with them. And so, in that way, as it begins to take up more and more space in the mind, there's less room for nonsense. And as it's been said, when the secret of God enters the heart, all the petty secrets have to move out. And that's a religious way of saying that underneath of the noise and the arm waving at the surface of our experience, where we ordinarily identify, there is one enters into a sense of boundlessness that's enormously rich and totally cherishing of one's being, and which is like just there all the time, even in the midst of the petty hazing that the universe hands out from time to time. Much easier just to breathe through all of that and stay centered. And as we say in the 21st century, keep our nervous system regulated. Takes practice. That's why we call these practices. So Fikr is the putting of a sacred phrase into the breath and breathing it in and out on the rhythm of the breath. And this becomes insidious, and it works its way into our being at deeper and deeper levels. And then that becomes this feeling of support and inner nourishment. I'll read this riff again. Fikr is a practice which is a tradition of most Sufis, by which they keep before themselves the nothingness of ego and the allness of God, although my commentary, none of us start out there. To learn and feel until they know that God is the only being. One may say that the disciple in Fikr can be called Fakir, the poor one, the unattached person. For the fulfillment of Fikr is that there is nothing in the world, in heaven or upon earth, which can cling to the personality who is determined to complete their journey back to God. Therefore, Fikr aids much in the purification of mind. It forces the thoughts away. It may be called the vacuum cleaner of the mind. It helps to preserve the mental magnetism and to restore it when lost. It is valuable in strengthening any mental faculty and in restoring those which are lost. So in a certain sense, Fikr accomplishes the same results as meditation. Meditation consists of preparation, performance, and application, which means action. Then when one holds the spirit of unity at all times, the whole of life becomes meditation. So, not as a concept, but as a living, immediate, sensate awareness that one's depth, the core of one's being, is contiguous with the whole universe and with a timeless, spaceless source. And that each breath that we indraw is a renewal of that life force which animates our bodies and that light of intelligence which animates our minds.
Can you rewind, please?
Hmm?
Can you rewind?
I thought that was good. I don't know if I can do it again.
It was really good. It was really good. I lost you at fuck. It wasn't a long
I
time
think the practices are working.
because I lost you.
Yeah. This Sufi stuff works.
Well, where did you put him last?
Huh?
Where did you put him last?
It was a little.
Let me see if I can, hold on. Let me go back to the riff. Let's see if I can recapture what it was that was said. Then when one holds the spirit of unity at all times. All right, the spirit of unity is not a theory, it's a direct experience.
Mhm.
In the moment of that in us, which is contiguous with the source of life, that life force which animates the body, and that light and intelligence which animates our minds. And it's a direct experience. It's not a theory. It's not a memory of something that we felt in the past. It's right now. Then when one holds the spirit of unity at all times, the whole of life becomes a meditation. And that's what's actually meant by mindfulness. In this, meditation differs from fikr, which has to be performed in a certain way and which cannot very well be done in the presence of others or when there is any possibility of a disturbance. I actually disagree. I think that's a perfect time to be doing fikr.
Yeah, that's what that was making me the question. Was he
Yeah.
talking about fikr or was he talking about meditation
Well,
in that particular instance?
Yeah, I sort of.
hold on.
Fair enough.
We'll come back to that. It's my experience that a fikr continually on the breath is the most excellent practice in the midst of daily life, doing dishes, even hanging out with friends. And in the East, you'll often see Sufis just, they've got their prayer beads in one hand and they're very slowly taking off the repetitions of whatever thing they've got on their breath. And sometimes you can even tell from their atmosphere what practice they're doing because they carry the vibration of that so so sensationally. If you're working with a particular divine quality, you can feel that the same way as you can feel like their body heat. You can discern the actual quality. The performance of meditation can reach the goal, however, when one can maintain full inner rapport without there being any impediment to outward activity. Meditation aids greatly in the development of insight, which can become the deepest faculty of the mind. There is no limit to the length of time one may indulge in it either. Akbar, the great Sufi and Mughal emperor of India, was able to get along with practically no sleep, often meditating for hours a night instead. Meditation may be performed at any time, although there is a certain advantage if the same hours can be used every day. The length of it does not matter so much, although it often requires several minutes to accomplish that stillness, which is the real meditation. Some persons cannot do it in less than 30 minutes. Therefore, a gradual lengthening of the period of meditation to that time is advantageous. There are also some people who simply don't do well with seated practice. And the great advantage of fikr is that you can do it walking. You can put the syllables onto your gait, timing your inhale and exhale to a certain number of steps. And what that does is that it syncs up some very basic body rhythms. You start by finding a heartbeat, then you time your inhale and your exhale to a certain number of those heartbeats. It might be 4 in, 4 out, or 8 in, 8 out. Then you begin stepping in the rhythm of the heartbeat. Foot comes down for every heartbeat. And then you put a fikr into the breath. So many steps and heartbeats in, so many steps and heartbeats out. And when that's accomplished, it goes deeper and deeper. And for people who have trouble sitting and concentrating, perhaps they get drowsy or perhaps the mind wanders, this is the bomb. So, any questions, comments, requests, arguments?
The 99 names of God would be Fikr, right?
Well,
If you do one or you do the two opposites.
Single names or combinations of names can be done through the technique of putting them on the breath. You can also put the syllables of a zikr on the breath. Breathing out la ilaha, inhaling illallah or illallahu.
Also, why do you need to use you were saying this, Sufi's using the beads, to count why do you need to count even? If you're just doing on the breath a Fikr, why not just do it, and who cares how many there are,
That's one way. That's one way. I mean, if I put a certain formula on my breath and then walk to Goodies and buy some groceries and walk back, I'm probably not counting.
Because I think the counting would be kind of distracting and you're thinking about something else,
Well,
beads and
one of the purposes of this is you don't have to think about the numbers. There is a usefulness in certain numbers. There's a numerology that goes with this that has a certain effect on the unconscious.
like doing something 99 times.
Yeah.
Or a couple thousand.
Or a few thousand. Yeah.
Yeah.
On that long retreat that I underwent back in 2012, the only requirement is that I had to repeat this certain zikr 125,000 times.
Geez, so you had to count it. So
Yeah.
you lose track 5 days into it. Where was I? Was it?
Well, no, I just counted a certain number per day, and over 40 days, that was enough. So what these extra danglies are is for counting hundreds or thousands of a particular formula.
For me, when I use prayer beads, I do find it a lot. I like prayer beads because it's something to sort of preoccupy a certain section of your mind on.
Mm-hmm.
I never even knew that prayer beads are supposed to have a certain amount of beads on them. I never count. I make it a point not to count. The prayer beads for me are just there to move through with every breath.
And that's certainly one way of doing it. And that's how some people use it. And other people or the same people at different times will attend to the particular number because that has the different numbers have an effect.
So doing a certain name, a certain number of times has like a specific effect.
Yep.
You mentioned one time there was a certain name that you can't like, you don't run out of, like there's an endless well, basically. And you were just mentioning specific names where it's like you could say it and like you wouldn't really run out of like the sensate experience, basically. Does the process of like saying it a certain number of time, is there like some sort of conservation element? Maybe that's the wrong way to phrase it. I'm trying to put words to like something more like sensual. But like, do you know what I'm trying to say?
I'm not sure, but I'll make up that I do.
Okay, I'll correct you if I feel like they're not.
Um, the number of repetitions in a certain manner of practice, like when you actually say, this is my particular time to do practice. Number is rhythm. And rhythm has momentum. And when we invoke these energies, I don't like the word, but it'll do. When we invoke these energies a certain number of times, there's a momentum that is generated. And so we do it like 33 times, and then we get up and get breakfast, or we go on to a different name or some other kind of practice. And you can feel, especially if you've done, first of all, done it out loud and then put it on the breath, you can feel it continuing to unfold. And with regard to what I think you said about there being no end to it, all of the divine names are essentially boundless. And when we really touch into them, like when our consciousness really connects, that sense of boundlessness is sensate. And we can feel our own depth where it merges into that particular quality of boundlessness. And also all of the names under the hood, as it were, are connected to all of the others. First of all, there are constellations of names. There's names of light, there's names of power, there's names of love, there's names of compassion. There's a lot of different constellations of them. And each of the names is first of all connected to its particular constellation, and then from there on to all the rest. And you'll sometimes find that working with a particular name will suddenly become a portal into a whole different quality.
So for mystics who don't have to like get back to, you know, what we feel is like the distraction of life, or who are just basically like sitting there at the masjid, like repeating and like choosing to repeat only a specific number of times, is that like a micro dosing kind of thing?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
Mhm.
Because And if you were to just continue to repeat it over and over and over, does that sometimes create like an undesirable effect depending on what the practitioner is looking for in their practice? And then there's kind of that.
If it's the right practice, it has not been my experience. It may take you through having to deal with or having to confront a particular block in your personality that does not easily allow that energy to move. Like, it's a common experience in working with different qualities of light, because consciousness itself is light. Intelligence is a particular aspect of light. And there's something that I'm going to call brilliancy, which is that really incisive quality of the mind that just cuts through
Bullshit.
all the bullshit. And in some families, it's not okay to see through the bullshit. And so, you come up against essentially the trauma of having been punished for calling out the bullshit, or even just seeing it and refusing to comply. So there's all of these layers that to allow a divine quality to really take up residence and to like burn away not only the blocks to it, but also the counterfeits of it. It takes some doing. It's the work sometimes of years. And it's doable.
I have two more questions that interlink.
Okay.
One, so it kind of starts with you were talking about the sensate experience of unification and perceiving unity. When the ego is experiencing that with you, and maybe the ego is more, it's taking up more space in your experience period.
Yeah.
So like I read this quote by it was like a Sufi who said that paranoia is the ego in its purest form. Like that I'm being watched, I'm being perceived, I'm being seen, I'm being witnessed.
I am obsessively watching myself, but not in a good way. I mean, I'm what he's saying is that it's a kind of self-absorption. It's a kind of narcissistic self-focus that is very encapsulated and doesn't really have any permeability.
What I understood from what he was saying was that in the construction of the ego in and of itself, and in the gift of the ego in and of itself, its perceptive capacity is only to witness itself being witnessed.
It has no capacity of its own.
Okay.
It's really just an accommodation. Everything that the ego says, wherever it says I, it's really borrowing that experience.
So it's not necessarily like a so I'm like, I'm very palpably am experiencing the spirit of something, but I think my psyche turns it into an entity. So it's not the ego's not an entity in the way of like a personified.
No,
So,
it's a structure, but it's a structure that has no essential substance.
Okay, I see.
It's a lens.
I see.
It's a filter.
I see. Okay. Okay. So I guess, sorry, I just want to finish the question before I.
Yeah.
So all that.
Mhm.
So when there's like this experience, two things, when there's this experience of, oh, that's what it is. So sit. No. When I perceive. So
Right, the wet nose, right? Yeah.
at least it doesn't lick everything.
I don't know about that. Okay. So the perception of unity and the perception of like the bullshit.
Mhm.
So in seeing people clearly or in seeing shadows, for example, things people don't want to look at.
Yeah.
And then also experiencing like oneness. In having those experience, it feels like there is like a lens there
Mhm.
where it's like you can feel like the experience on in the outer rims of the self, but
Okay.
in this like in a certain space there's this kind of like disconnection. Maybe it's the pain or trauma body in and of itself being unable to engage with that experience. Yeah, what is that like? I don't know, I'm just curious about that.
It's what you just said.
Okay.
Okay, so I had a short discussion about this with Kervalayat
Mhm.
after one of the meditations at a retreat. And he said something that I thought was really cogent, which is the personality is real, but the ego is not.
I don't.
It's not easy. So the
You
the personality has its roots, is actually rooted in our bodies. It's the product of our upbringing. It's the product of a whole bunch of stuff. It's a product of some of the things that we brought with us to this incarnation from other planes. And that's a whole class by itself, or 6.
My ego wants to know more about that.
And yeah, well, at some point, going to touch on it a little bit in this teaching on the breath, because it is actually about the breath. The ego is a self-representation as a kind of balloon
Mm.
around the personality, like a
Mm.
soap bubble. It's got about that much substance.
How it wants to be perceived versus
Well,
what it actually
More
is.
like defenses.
It's defenses, it's a lot of history. It's a lot of trying to steer life in all those ways that, it's like the song says, looking for love in all the wrong places.
Looking for love in the wrong places.
It's really feeling looking for love in my little.
Context oblivious.
That was so funny. That was
He was just demonstrating the reality.
Well, that's why he comes to class, so he can demonstrate, you know, the actual state of most of our egos. So there's this wonderful picture I have. I made a meme out of it, of a warthog absolutely covered in mud. And I captioned it, what your teacher actually sees while you're going on about we need our egos.
Going back to your question number one, I think the way I understand it is that you need some understanding of what the phrase or the mantra or the one of the 99 names that you're repeating and what kind of changes it will unlock in you. For example, you probably don't ever want to say, you know, or call on the name of Khahar. You
Remind me
know,
what that name means.
Khahar just, yeah,
The destroyer.
the destroyer. I mean, it's not the destroyer.
I'm
It's
actually
really
a
the
little comfortable with that one.
no. So, but it's an incinerator. It's an incinerator. It's the gaze. When Moses went up to see God, and he was terrified that if his eyes saw God and God,
He would.
yes, there would be nothing, not even smoke left. So that's the incinerator, right? So you need to have an understanding of what the words are that you're repeating and what purpose you're using them for and what you're trying to unlock and to what degree. So without supervision, it's probably not a good idea.
Yes,
Um,
and somebody, you know, a Murshid may give you that name on a retreat because it's the time
It
to
has a
be
purpose and a
the time-
plan.
it's the time to be incinerated.
Yeah, and I think I wasn't necessarily like asking in terms of like looking for safety or like, oh, like what's I think I'm more like I'm just I'm more curious about I really enjoy like building relationships with like the number, like the fact that we say it 33 times and like what is the experience of that specifically
Mhm.
not yeah, I don't know what the rest of my sentence is.
Well, the way to find out about that is to do something 33 times, or a few times, a few occasions, and then do it 34 and see how that feels different.
But the corollary to what I said is that I'm going to give a personal example. I've never tried to say the word kahar, never going never intentionally going to do that. But Hafizullah assigned me a wazifa. Okay. I was supposed to do 3 things. But the first thing felt so good. It just felt so good that I could not stop saying it. And oftentimes I would start especially in the morning with the first thing, and then I would run out of time because I just want to keep going. And so I called Hafizullah and I was like, hey, what's the deal with that? I have this resistance to do number 2 and number 3, but the first one, I just love it. It feels so good, just rolls off my tongue, cascades through my being. And the reality of it was what he said on the phone was that there's some part of my ego, some part of my grandiosity that has gotten hooked into it. And so it feels good. So I'm like an addicted mouse constantly reaching for that sugar water. So you really got to know what you're doing and you got to have some supervision, at least in the beginning.
You know, and at some times, the sugar water is just the thing.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Oh yeah.
especially if you're a hummingbird.
There you go. Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
So, you know, there's no actual cookbook about this. It's just this.
I am autistic. I want rules.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I understand you completely.
I'm
Your life will be happier if you can get that.
I'm also autistic. I love structure. I know I want to know what the facts are. if you lie to me about something, you are my enemy forever. Because I really need the truth.
Yeah.
And that's just a part of me. It's
Mm.
sometimes in my face, and most of the time it's just
He's like,
okay.
drawn to this.
Mhm. In this trauma therapist training,
Settle down, huh?
I'd actually run into this concept a long time ago, and I use the basic principle here a lot actually, but there's what's called the competent protector. So yourself as an adult with all of your adult knowledge and savvy and power goes back in time to rescue,
Mhm.
the small child that could
Mhm.
not defend itself. So, in my case, it's it's become the extraterrestrial that I needed to abduct me as a kid. So I think it's a very common experience of people on this spectrum that they need the extraterrestrial to abduct,
Yeah, I just, yeah. When you talked about like, oh, there was a point in time where like I really just, you were basically saying like you kind of coddled like um your sensitivity
Mhm.
too much or something along those words. And so I'm like, I guess I'm trying to figure out like honestly, like this is kind of why Kadru is interesting because it feels like Kadru comes around and like
Mhm.
I can like either like really like oh da, 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 or stay away from me. Like one of the two. There's no like ability to like you be here and you don't take over the whole experience and we can be close to each other and you don't take over the whole experience. That's kind of like
Yeah.
where I'm
Well, like I said, he represents all of our egos, and all
Yeah.
of our egos want to take over the whole experience.
yeah.
But really,
And part of what spiritual practice is about is teaching the ego to sit and stay
Be adorable.
while the rest of us does useful stuff. Rowan, you had a question.
Multiple building up. Really?
Be mindful of this. Be mindful of this space. We were just doing
Fair.
some pretty intense practice, and people might be
Mhm.
sensitized.
So something I want to say as far as being autistic and really liking rules,
Mhm.
that this is less so a question, more so something I find helpful for that. I'm working from the matter. How many of y'all have seen Kung Fu Panda? So much for the
I love that.
yeah. Weirdly enough, the thing that helped me and was in the first one, Master Oogway's peach speech to Shifu. Yeah, the whole thing of look, if you want to, the only path towards happiness, the only path towards inner peace, as it were, is to understand that truly you have no control. Yes, there are yes, there are certain things you can control in life. You can control where you plant the seed,
Mhm.
but you can't control if it will be a peach tree, or if that seed will move somewhere else due to a landslide, or if that seed will even grow because of a drought or
Mhm.
whatever. There are certain things that are just outside of your control. no matter how many rules you make, there will always be an edge case. And the stiffer you stick to those rules, the more brittle they will break, the more brittle they will break in the
And
winds
make you.
of life.
It's true.
Um,
And so when we
accept it.
we
or
don't we
live
don't really
brittlely.
give up control. We never had control. What we give up is anxiety.
Mhm.
And the way that that's done is not to step off into the abyss, because that's unsupportable. Rumi notwithstanding. The birds make great sky circles of their freedom. How do they learn it? They fall, and in falling, they're given wing. Well, that's wonderful in the afterglow of a good zikr. The reality is that we cannot force ourselves to do that, because the purpose of our ego is to protect the body, and protect the body it will. And if you try to force certain things without the right foundation, all you will do is become paralyzed. You'll basically go into freeze. And so the way to approach this release of trying to steer what fundamentally can't be steered is that we find the support within, where, as I was saying a little bit earlier, there is that of us which is contiguous with source and the boundlessness of that and the power of that and the cherishment of that and the light of that shows us what's up, what the situation is. And that is what drives the bus. And that finding that in ourselves takes as long as it takes. One of the purposes of doing practice in a group is not only what he said in this discourse, which is that it amplifies the effect of the energy of the practice, but also there's something palpable that we can let go into and let it carry us. That is the preparation for letting go into the boundless and letting it carry us. And inside of that, there is all support. There is everything that's needed. And when we stop trying to have it our own way, it speaks us into existence in a way that is totally in harmony with the ever new unfolding of each moment. And I'm going to cop a plea here, which is that big part of why I teach is that this is the only place that I can really manage that consistently.
And I know I'm Kaju's mom. And I know Kaju's obnoxious, although very lovable. But I said to him that I would say this. I mean, I appreciate the fact that you are authentic in your reaction to Kaju. I think that's the first step, and that requires a lot of courage. But your reaction is yours. Kaju is like any variable in the world. You can't control Kaju. You literally can't. But The only thing you can control is your reaction.
To be real, for me, I don't care about any of that because my entire life as an autistic person, everybody's been telling me to adapt, and it's led to me being physiologically harmed and harming myself and accepting harm from people around me constantly and consistently. And so all those kinds of advice about, oh, you can't control like what's going on, I think it'll be very helpful for me to have at a certain point in my life. Right now, like my main mission for me to set up the structure and foundation for me to even get to that point is rooting in like, I need to advocate for my needs.
Mhm.
I need to make sure people understand like this is how I'm physiologically set up. These are I need certain things in certain ways, and I do need to control things in a certain way that people may get or not get. But yeah, that's where I'm at. So like I'm very resistant to like any like adaptability advice because I'm just like, nope. For the first time in my life, I'm allowing myself to be like, no, fuck that. I'm gonna control that. And maybe I'll pendulum swing off the deep end, but I'm okay with that so that I can actually get to center.
Mhm.
I mean, the resistance is loud and clear in your body language, in your tone of voice. And I'm not giving advice to adapt. I think I'm asking you to pay attention to the reaction, right? There is adapting to conformity, there's adapting to others' comfort level, and that's not really what I'm suggesting. It certainly shouldn't come at the cost of your comfort, right? But I'm saying in observing your reaction is where really in a way the freedom lies. And self-discovery and self-growth lies. I'm not asking you to change anything because if it's real for you and if it's authentic, you will move along there regardless of whatever shit I throw your way. But just being observant of yourself, I think, will give you clues about where you need to head, really.
Mhm.
I agree with that.
And
Yeah.
and I believe that you are.
Thank you. Believe in what? That you are what?
That
Hafizullah knows
that they are monitoring their own
Mhm.
process.
I've done the SEI sessions with Hafizullah for a second, so Hafizullah knows how big it was for me to just say what I said to you.
No, and I probably
Yeah.
the thing that was really loud and clear for me really is that you have stayed silent for so long with probably so many people in your history
Yeah.
that it now takes that elevation of voice. It takes that inhabiting, embodying that tension to
Mhm.
actually say the words. But there will come a time where you can actually set a boundary without needing to
I
do that,
agree.
all that.
I agree.
But observation is key, is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're doing that.
Thank you. Yeah. And thank you. I appreciate that you see and observe things and you express them out loud. And
Oh, because I was you. If you
I don't like that.
no. Ask Zach, ask him the shenanigans I
Not that,
pulled in the year after my mom died,
Oh, yeah, that's turmoil.
right? So you and I think I also had spent a lot of time not processing, swallowing this idea that for me to be acceptable, I had to play the game of conformity, and that either I was too much or too little or whatever it was, I had been swallowing a lot of shit, and I had to make a decision to open my throat chakra and be able to speak my truth. I mean, it takes a lot of courage, and there's so much inherent fear in that to even say, that's not something I'm comfortable with. I don't want it, or I don't like it, or whatever it is. and trauma comes with its own shit, but yeah, I know. I think it's part of everyone's evolution in a way, really, to figure out what your boundaries are and what you need and how you're going to ask for it.
My daughter has little dogs and I'm just constantly going, get down, Bailey, get down,
Yeah.
box.
Um.
So one more question.
One question.
Make it good.
Go what?
Uh.
Grand finale.
Okay. I have two more.
No,
I'm sorry.
just
Your
one.
time's up.
Fair enough. Good night, everyone. Have a good one. Okay. No, I got nothing. Both my questions were answered during the course of the conversation.
Liar.
No, seriously. One of my questions was of the 99 names of God. You mentioned that there was love, that there was beauty, that there was creation. I wanted to ask, well, are there any names of God like hate, spite, destruction? And you answered that question for me.
There's
The
one for hate,
No.
and there's one for spite.
which
Well,
There is the humiliator.
how it
The
shows up to
debaser.
how it shows up to me is that there are some of the names function in the relative world, this one, like a seesaw. So there is the exalter, Rafi, and there's the abaser, Hafid. And most of us, our lives are on that teeter-totter. You know, we're either raised up or we're, you know, and there's several like that. And there's also the notion that these different energies, which are self-subsisting, they just exist. They would exist whether there were any humans to discern them or not. They're not human contrivances. We didn't make this up. Most of us, like I said, are impaled on those dualities. Part of what the practices do is move our point of identification closer and closer to the center of rotation until we hit that dimensionless point that doesn't move at all. The engineer here is going, yeah. Dig it.
I was like, yeah, I can visualize it.
So, of those names that are less welcomable, like the abaser or the you know, all of God's unwelcomable stuff is distinguished from all God's good stuff. Like I said, there's a number of them. The distortions of those less welcomable names in the personality can turn up as hate or prejudice or rejection, or, you know, all of those kinds of things. So let's just breathe for a moment.
You know, they're very vigorous and very thorough.
I know. That's why they say nature abhors a vacuum.
Just pretend it's kind.
Must have heard us.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين يا الله.
Did you notice that they no longer say master, they say messenger now?
I saw that.